April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above Conches, France. Through the canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A-5, Oberleutnant Ralph Hermeken allowed himself a smirk. The oxygen mask couldn't hide it. Below, a formation of bulky newcomers clawed skyward. Die Armee has sent us flying milk bottles, he joked to his wingman. Laughter echoed across the radio net as the Luftwaffe ace of Jägerschwader 26 studied the American debutantes, 16 Republic P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group. To German eyes, they looked absurd. Barrel-shaped fuselages, propellers larger than anything in the Luftwaffe's inventory, wings that seemed far too small. Compared with Spitfires or Yak fighters, these 7-ton machines were ungainly giants. Surely, the Americans had sent lambs to slaughter. What Hermeken and his comrades didn't know was that they were witnessing the arrival of the machine that would shatter German air power. Within 18 months, the P-47 would transform from object of ridicule into the most feared sound in the sky, the thunder of 8.50 caliber Browning spitting 6,000 rounds a minute. Enough firepower to saw a Messerschmitt in half in 2 seconds. That morning, Major Donald Blakesley, veteran of the RAF's Eagle squadrons, led the 335th Fighter Squadron. He knew what his men did not, that survival in the P-47 meant unlearning everything about air combat. This was no nimble dogfighter. It was a high-altitude juggernaut, designed not to dance but to strike with overwhelming force. The Americans were rookies. Most had never fired a shot in anger. The Germans above were hardened killers, veterans of Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. Experience versus inexperience. Precision against brute force. The P-47 had been born in panic, back in June 1940. As German fighters swept across France, Republic Aviation's chief designer, Alexander Kartveli, was told to create a high-altitude interceptor. What he delivered shocked even his own engineers. It will be a dinosaur, he admitted, but a dinosaur with good proportions. The prototype XP-47B that flew in 1941 dwarfed anything that had come before. Nearly 10,000 pounds empty, powered by the massive Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp, it carried a turbo-supercharger that gave sea-level power at 27,000 feet, an altitude where German engines gasped for air. Yet the beast was dangerous to its own pilots. Between late 1942 and early 1943, the 56th Fighter Group lost 18 men and 41 aircraft in training accidents. It ground-looped on landing, torque-rolled on takeoff, and plunged into dives so fast that shockwaves froze the controls. It killed more Americans in training than Germans in combat, at first, but those who mastered it found unmatched power. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, who would score 27 victories, said flying it was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. The first combats confirmed German arrogance. The P-47 couldn't climb with the Bf-109 or turn with the FW-190. Jägerschwader 26S Joseph, Pips, Priller dismissed it. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. But the Germans had misread the monster. The day would come when those same pilots, once laughing, would dive for cover at the mere sight of a Thunderbolt, because when its 8 Brownings opened fire, the joke was over. In their first month of operations, the American fighter groups suffered badly. 14 Thunderbolts were lost for only 3 confirmed German kills. RAF observers in their sleek Spitfires shook their heads. Some even suggested the Americans reconsider their new mount. The jokes came quickly. British pilots quipped that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was simply to unstrap and run around its cavernous cockpit. But the Germans missed something. The Thunderbolt was proving nearly indestructible. Aircraft returned peppered with holes that would have ripped a Messerschmitt or Spitfire to pieces. One came back from a May mission with 21 cannon strikes and more than 100 machine gun hits. The big radial engine, with no fragile coolant system to puncture, kept running where liquid-cooled engines would have seized. And when the P-47's guns did find their mark, the results were catastrophic. Unlike cannon with limited ammunition, or rifle-caliber guns that lacked punch, the Thunderbolt's 8 Brownings could maintain 30 seconds of sustained fire, a lifetime in aerial combat. The event that changed German perceptions came on June 26, 1943, over Lille, France. Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron was flying home with 47 other Thunderbolts when 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from Jägerschwader 26, led by Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, the younger brother of Adolf Galland, struck from the sun. The attack was flawless. Johnson's P-47, flying at the rear, was shredded in seconds. 20mm shells tore through the canopy, hydraulic fluid filled the cockpit, and flames erupted across the nose. Wounded and half-blinded by oil, Johnson tried to bail out, but the canopy was jammed shut, welded by shrapnel. He was trapped in a crippled fighter at 27,000 feet. What followed became legend. With controls barely responding, Johnson somehow leveled out and aimed for the channel. Then a lone FW-190 slid in behind him. The German pilot, never conclusively identified, opened fire with 4 cannons and 2 heavy machine guns. The Thunderbolt staggered under the barrage, but kept flying. The German circled, repositioned, and fired again, exhausting his cannon shells. Still, the P-47 refused to die. Closing in, he poured his remaining machine gun ammunition into Johnson's aircraft. Over 200 holes were punched through the fuselage. 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural spine of the airframe, were severed. Yet the Thunderbolt lumbered on. At last, the German pilot eased alongside, staring in disbelief. Johnson could see his young, blonde face clearly, his expression shifting from confidence to amazement. He shook his head, raised a hand in salute, and peeled away. Out of ammunition, he had seen enough. Against all odds, Johnson coaxed his burning, broken Thunderbolt back to England, crash-landing at Manston with the engine failing on the runway. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after 200. The story raced through both air forces. American engineers realized they had underestimated their creation. German intelligence, at first dismissive, was forced to accept the truth. The Thunderbolt could take everything the Luftwaffe had, and still bring its pilot home. By July 1943, American pilots had adapted. Colonel Hubert Zemke drilled his men in new tactics: don't turn, don't climb, dive. Use the weight, use the power, unleash the guns. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach 550 miles per hour in a dive, faster than any German fighter alive. Then it would zoom back upward, ready to strike again. The Luftwaffe had laughed at the milk bottles. Soon, they would call them something else entirely: executioners in the sky. At the bottom of their dives, the American heavy machine guns spoke with terrifying finality. Surviving Luftwaffe pilots recalled it as facing a wall of lead, an impenetrable zone of destruction where aircraft didn't simply fall, they disintegrated. The true scale of this firepower was revealed on August 17, 1943, during the Great Duel Raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the deepest penetration into Germany attempted to that point. The mission would expose both the Thunderbolt's limitations in range and its terrifying effectiveness when employed properly. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, spotted a formation of Messerschmitt 110 destroyers maneuvering to strike the B-17s. Armed with heavy cannons and rockets, these twin-engine fighters were designed to annihilate bombers. Schilling's 4 Thunderbolts rolled into their dive from 28,000 feet. Heinrich Roth, a German gunner who survived, later told his interrogators, "They came down like hammers from heaven. I fired at 800 meters and saw my shell strike the American's wing, but it didn't even shudder. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Wings torn off, the fuselage shredded into metal confetti. In seconds, it was gone. 8 German destroyers were obliterated in under a minute. Each Thunderbolt carried 3,400 rounds, nearly 900 pounds of ammunition. At the convergence point, typically set at 300 yards, the ballistic streams of all 8 guns intersected in a 6-foot circle. Inside that circle came 100 half-inch projectiles every second, each traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second. Against such firepower, survival was almost impossible. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski later explained, "When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down. They explode. I saw a 109 literally cut in half, the tail one way, the nose another. The pilot never knew what hit him." By late 1943, the Luftwaffe faced a grim new reality. The P-47's turbosupercharged engine delivered full power above 30,000 feet, while German engines faltered in thin air. On October 8, 1943, Oberstleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's greatest aces with over 200 victories, led an interception at 28,000 feet. His FW-190A-6 gasped for oxygen. From higher still, the Thunderbolts of the 56th Fighter Group swooped down. Robert Johnson fired at 300 yards. Phillips' fighter exploded, leaving no parachute. The loss of such a legend sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If Hans Philipp could not survive, what hope did the rest have? By November, German intelligence reported to Reichsmarshal Göring that the P-47's ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet beyond reach of their fighters. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. Its armor protected the pilot and engine, while its construction allowed it to absorb punishment that would destroy 3 conventional fighters. Then, in January 1944, came the transformation. The new P-47D-22 carried a Hamilton standard paddle blade propeller, 13 feet across. Climb rates soared from 2,200 to 3,000 feet per minute, matching German fighters at most altitudes. Acceleration improved dramatically, and the sound changed too, the supersonic roar of its propeller tips echoing for miles. Veteran German ace Heinrich Nock recorded the shock in his diary after a battle near Hanover in February. "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced them as before, but they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The laughter was gone. In its place came fear, the unmistakable roar of the Thunderbolt closing in. German ground troops soon learned to recognize the P-47 Thunderbolt long before it appeared. Its deep, rolling growl carried a promise of destruction. They called it Donnerschlag, the thunderclap. By early 1944, with external fuel tanks extending its range beyond 1,000 miles, the Thunderbolt could escort bombers deep into Germany. The new paddle blade propeller gave it speed and agility even when heavily loaded. For Luftwaffe pilots, engaging bombers meant flying through walls of P-47s, a gamble that bordered on suicide. Even Germany's top aces took note. Major Gunther Rall, with 275 victories, recalled an encounter on March 6, 1944, "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the sun. Someone laughed, 'Here come the flying pigs.' But seconds later, they fell on us like an avalanche. 3 of our fighters were gone instantly, just fire and wreckage. Their guns didn't chatter like ours. They poured out rivers of fire. To be caught in that stream meant instant death." What gave the Thunderbolt its edge was endurance. German fighters, burning fuel at full throttle, had minutes of combat time. The big Pratt & Whitney radial could cruise efficiently at high altitude, keeping P-47s with the bombers for hours. By spring 1944, as the Mustang took over long-range escort, Thunderbolt groups shifted toward ground attack, a role in which they would become truly fearsome. The firepower of 8.50 caliber machine guns could shred soft targets in seconds. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds punched through the thin tops of German vehicles. A 2-second burst delivered over 160 half-inch projectiles into an area the size of a truck. But bombs and rockets turned the Thunderbolt into flying artillery. The D-25 variant could haul a 2,500-pound bomb load, equal to early medium bombers, while later versions mounted 10 5-inch rockets, each with the punch of a 105mm shell. German troops felt the impact firsthand. Oberst Hans von Luck recalled, "They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. Engines roaring, rockets screaming, machine guns hammering. A column of trucks simply ceased to exist, 20 vehicles burning in one pass. The effect on the men was devastating. These were not fighter bombers. They were flying artillery, and with terrifying precision. On D-Day, over 500 Thunderbolts patrolled the skies above Normandy. German pilot Wolfgang Fischer described his unit's attempt to reach the beaches. 12 of us went in at dawn. I was the only one to return. The Thunderbolts were stacked from the sea to 30,000 feet. You could not go over them, or under them. Their guns turned us into aluminum rain. The statistics told the same story. In June 1944 alone, Thunderbolts destroyed 651 locomotives, nearly 4,000 trucks, over 500 tanks and armored vehicles, and more than 4,500 horse-drawn wagons. German forces were forced onto the roads only at night. Nothing, armor, camouflage, flak, seemed to stop them. Nor was their reach limited to Europe. In the Pacific, the 348th Fighter Group discovered the Thunderbolt was just as deadly. On October 11, 1943, Colonel Neil Kirby led 4 P-47s against 40 Japanese aircraft over Wewak, personally downing 6 in a single fight. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai later admitted, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannon, which could shatter a P-40, had no effect. I poured dozens of shells into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away." With the long-range P-47N extending its reach to 2,350 miles, the Thunderbolt became a weapon of global war, equally at home over Normandy or New Guinea. To friend and foe alike, it proved that America's flying pig was no joke. By late 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt had evolved far beyond the short-legged fighter of its early years. The long-range P-47N could now escort B-29s to Japan, proving the design had become a true global weapon. Its ultimate test, however, came against the world's first operational jet, the Messerschmitt Me-262. With a top speed of 540 miles per hour, the jet should have been untouchable. Yet Thunderbolt pilots found two windows of opportunity, during takeoff and landing, when the jets were slowest, and in steep dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group became one of the first P-47 pilots to shoot down a jet. Diving from 28,000 feet, his Thunderbolt hit nearly 500 miles per hour, fast enough to close the distance. The Me-262 pilot, confident in his speed, never saw him coming. Meyer's guns roared at 400 yards. His report was blunt: the enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Both engines tore free. The pilot never escaped. 8.50 calibers proved more effective than we had imagined. The Thunderbolt's evolution continued. By early 1945, the high-performance P-47M appeared, with water methanol injection boosting its massive radial engine to 2,800 horsepower. Capable of 470 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, it could chase down jets under the right conditions. Major George Bostwick of the 63rd Fighter Squadron used his P-47M to shoot down two Me-262s. His assessment was clear: the jets are faster, yes. But they can't turn, and they can't take punishment. One burst from our guns and they break apart like paper. To attack bombers, they must slow down, and that's when we catch them. The Luftwaffe's last desperate gamble came on New Year's Day, 1945, Operation Bodenplatte. Nearly 900 German fighters, many flown by their best surviving pilots, launched a massive surprise strike on Allied airfields. At Y-34 airfield near Metz, home of the 365th Fighter Group, German aircraft destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground. A captured pilot sneered, pointing at the wreckage, "What do you think of that?" Major George Brooking gave the legendary reply, "By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones." How long will it take you to replace your pilots? Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47D-40S filled the flight line. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and over 200 pilots, losses it could never replace. The Americans lost 134 aircraft across all airfields. Every one was replaced within a week. The numbers told the larger truth. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 Thunderbolts, more than any other American fighter. The Farmingdale, New York plant rolled one off the line every hour. The Evansville, Indiana factory, carved from farmland in 1942, produced 500 per month by 1944. Each Thunderbolt demanded 65,000 parts, 8 miles of wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and 300 pounds of rubber. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine alone contained 2,400 components, machined to thousandths of an inch. Yet American workers, many women with no experience before the war, assembled them with flawless precision. Behind every mission was a torrent of supplies. Each Thunderbolt sortie consumed 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. By mid-1944, the 9th Air Force alone required over 10 million rounds per month. Lake City Arsenal in Missouri produced 30 million monthly, each cartridge measured to 10,000ths of an inch. Fuel demand was equally staggering. The 9th Air Force burned 25 million gallons a month by late 1944, every gallon shipped across the U-boat-infested Atlantic. But the most decisive factor was training. By 1944, the U.S. graduated 30,000 pilots annually, more than Germany trained in the entire war. Each Thunderbolt pilot had at least 400 hours of flight time, including 100 in advanced fighters. German rookies went into combat with barely a quarter of that. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, arriving in England in September 1944, recalled, "I had 420 hours in my logbook, including 75 in the P-47. I'd fired at towed targets, studied gun camera film, practiced deflection shooting. On my first mission, I knew exactly what to do. The German across from me couldn't have had half my training. It wasn't a fair fight." In the end, the P-47 Thunderbolt was not just a weapon of steel and fire, it was proof of America's unmatched capacity to outproduce, outtrain, and outlast the Luftwaffe. Escape from the front lines. In March 1945, Oberstleutnant Joseph Priller, the same ace who had once dismissed the P-47 Thunderbolt as a pregnant cow, was interviewed by German propaganda officials desperate for good news. What he said never made it to print. His words were judged too demoralizing. "The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built," he admitted. "Its firepower never fails, guns that do not jam, do not overheat, and never seem to run dry. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, and still fights like a true fighter. But more than the machine is what it represents, unlimited American production. We lose one, it's gone forever. They lose 10, they build 20. Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. They have fuel, ammunition, and spare parts for everything. We have only courage, and courage without resources is just delayed defeat." We laughed in 1943. No one is laughing now. When you hear those guns, you know death has come calling. By spring, the Luftwaffe existed largely on paper. Fuel shortages kept aircraft grounded. The veterans were dead, the airfields cratered ruins. New pilots faced hopeless odds. Feldwebel Klaus Brechtender, one of the last graduates of 1945, flew a single mission. Over Leipzig, his Staffel was attacked by Thunderbolts. "I saw 4 of them dive, perfect formation," he recalled. "I tried to turn, but they were too fast. The leader fired from 500 meters. My aircraft shook like hammers struck it. The engine exploded, the wing tore away. I bailed out and watched 6 of our fighters destroyed in less than a minute. Burning aluminum fell from the sky. The psychological toll was immense. Medical officers reported a condition they called Jabo fever, stress symptoms triggered by reports of Thunderbolts nearby. Veterans who had fought Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear became physically ill at the thought of facing P-47s. On the ground, the sound alone, a deep thunder rolling across the horizon, caused panic. German troops knew survival meant finding cover immediately. The numbers tell the rest. In Europe, Thunderbolts destroyed 3,752 enemy aircraft in the air and another 3,315 on the ground. They wrecked 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. In the Pacific, they added nearly 700 Japanese aircraft in aerial combat and countless vehicles, barges, and installations. The 9th Air Force alone flew 213,873 combat sorties, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds of ammunition, and launched 60,000 rockets. Their kill ratio in air combat reached 4.6 to 1, all while maintaining the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter bomber. Behind those statistics lay a human tragedy for the Luftwaffe. Nearly 28,000 German fighter pilots were killed in combat against Western allies. By war's end, new recruits entered battle with barely 30 hours of experience. American P-47 pilots averaged over 200. Captured German intelligence reports revealed the change in perception. In April 1943, large, unmaneuverable, minimal threat. By December, significant threat above 25,000 feet. By June 1944, critical threat at all altitudes. And by March 1945, best fighter bomber of the war. Unbeatable in direct engagement. For decades later, at a reunion of former enemies in Phoenix, Arizona, Adolf Galland, the wartime head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, was asked his opinion of the Thunderbolt. His answer summed up the war's lesson: "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We laughed. We thought the Americans built a bomber and called it a fighter. But they understood what we did not, that in a war of attrition, the plane that could take punishment and deliver devastating firepower would prevail. They were right. When I finally flew a captured P-47, I understood. The power was astonishing. The visibility superb. The cockpit comfortable. It climbed like it was falling upward. It was a pilot's machine, wrapped in armor. And the Americans built over 15,000 of them while fighting a two-ocean war. That is why we lost. Each Thunderbolt carried an engine more complex than anything Germany ever built. Yet the Americans produced them faster than we could turn out our simplest fighters. That was the moment I understood, we never truly had a chance. And then came the sound of its guns. We called it Roosevelt's piano, a mechanical thunder of 8 Brownings spitting fire in unison. Once you heard it, you never forgot. Many of my comrades heard it for the last time. The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe. It dismantled it. Every inch of its design reflected America's industrial philosophy, brute force engineering combined with unlimited resources. Everything was overbuilt, overpowered, and over-engineered. Its wing spars could carry 40,000 pounds, 3 times the aircraft's loaded weight. The engine mount endured 12 gs of stress. Control cables ran in duplicate with automatic backups. Even the ammunition system was an engineering marvel, 8 separate boxes, each feeding through electric boost motors to prevent jams under high-G maneuvers. The guns themselves were heated to prevent freezing at altitude. Each had independent charging mechanisms and could be synchronized with precision. Pilots could set convergence anywhere from 150 to 400 yards, tailoring the aircraft to their style of combat. After the war, some German veterans tried to dismiss the Thunderbolt as a weapon of quantity, not quality, arguing that German fighters were technically superior, simply overwhelmed by numbers. But the records told a different story. In battles where numbers were even, the P-47 still came out ahead. Its machine guns, scorned as inferior to cannon, proved devastating in real combat. Gun camera footage revealed the truth. German 20mm shells were powerful but limited, 120 to 200 rounds at most, requiring precise aim. The Thunderbolt's .50 caliber weapons laid down a probability cloud of fire. In just a 2-second burst, at least 20 rounds would punch into a fighter-sized target, enough to tear it apart. And American ammunition itself was superior, armor-piercing incendiary rounds with delayed fuses that penetrated before detonating, burning at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. German shells often exploded on contact, dramatic but sometimes superficial. The Thunderbolt was the heaviest single-engine fighter mass-produced in the war. Its empty weight exceeded that of some twin-engine aircraft. Its engine produced more power than entire bomber squadrons of 1918. Its firepower surpassed an infantry platoon. And yet, America built more than 15,000 of them, flown by young men barely out of school, maintained by mechanics trained in weeks, not years. Within 2 years, German laughter turned to fear. The flying milk bottle, once mocked as clumsy and slow, became the most dreaded sight in the skies. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and Yaks without flinching admitted the P-47 filled them with dread. Today, at the United States Air Force Museum, a restored P-47D sits proudly on display. Beside it lies a strip of gun camera film showing a Focke-Wulf 190 exploding under its guns. A caption quotes a captured German pilot, "We laughed when we first saw them, fat, ugly machines that couldn't climb or turn. But they didn't need to. They just pointed those guns, and you ceased to exist." The laughter died with our comrades. The Thunderbolt entered combat as an object of ridicule. It ended the war as an instrument of annihilation. 8 Brownings roared, and the sky itself seemed to belong to America.